Alright, ladies and gentlemen, today's lecture is going to be on the art of flowing. Let's write it out here. Flowing. F-L-O-W-I-N-G. There we go. So flowing is an incredibly important debate skill, and it's basically a way of taking notes during a round. Simple as that. And the reason why it's incredibly important is because if you don't flow an argument, you might forget about it. So people have lost elimination rounds, important rounds in tournaments because they didn't write it down, so they didn't respond to it, and the opponents ended up winning the debate because of that argument. So it's an incredibly important debate skill. And I would say flowing, the reason why it's called flowing is because it gives you kind of like the flow, a sense of the flow of the round, kind of gives you an idea of the direction where the round is going, kind of gives you a bird's eye view of all the arguments made. And it has two basic sub-purposes, I would say. First is recording arguments and answers made by the opponents. And also to write stuff that you said. So record and also prepare for speeches, arguments, responses. And you're supposed to flow both sides. So your side and what your opponent said. And everybody's going to flow in different styles and they have their own method and whatever works for them. However, I'm just going to talk about two basic ways to flow in today's video. First is vertically and first is horizontally, and second I'm going to talk about vertically. And however, before we go into those two basic types of debate, even though everybody flows differently, there's three basic things that are in common. So first of all are the columns. So in flowing, there are going to be columns, sometimes divided by lines, sometimes the lines are invisible, but all the columns are going to stand for one speech. So one person speaking a separate speech. So one speech, so whatever that person says in one speech goes in that column. And if a second person goes up, gives another speech, it's not going to go in the same column, it's going to go in a different column. Like that, wherever. And so on. Pretty simple. Second rule you want to know is, what do we do with the rows? So the rows are supposed to be one thread of an argument. So it's basically going to look like a flow chart. And if somebody gives one argument in the case since the beginning, all the subsequent responses and responses to responses and so on are going to be in one row. They're not going to go sideways and upwards and downwards. You'll want to stick to one row because that's the best way to organize everything. Alright, columns and rows, pretty simple. And the third rule you want to know are arrows, or sometimes just lines. So those are going to be what I just drew right here, and their primary purpose would be to link arguments and answers together. So if somebody makes an argument, so that's the square right here, and answers with a triangle, you don't want to just put it next to each other, you want to draw an arrow, so you know this was a response to this argument. And also, you can draw arrows to you don't necessarily have to draw arrows to a response. You can draw arrows to extend or reiterate something that you already said. For example, if you talked about a square, and your opponents fail to respond to it, you could just draw arrows straight through in your second speech, and you can even say dropped to reiterate the fact that your opponents didn't respond to it, and also say what you said again. So those are the three basic rules you should remember, because these are common parts of all types of flowing. All right, let's first talk about horizontal type of flowing. You especially want to do this kind of flowing because, well, it's first old school. This was how debaters in the past, this is how everybody did it in the past, and it's still widely used in especially policy debate. So if you want to go into that, you want to look into this type of flowing. And some rules for this, some materials, you want to have a flow pad or a legal pad, so like a legit size legal pad, the longer the better. So that's going to be like 14 inches. If you can't find 14 inches, regular legal notepad would be better. You can find them in stores because they're yellow. So they're going to basically look like this. Yellow pad. There might be a red line drawn in the middle. And then there's going to be, I don't know, like blue ledger lines. And it's gonna be bundled in a little notepad. So you want a legal pad, a little notepad, and what else? So you want a larger size paper or a longer size paper, preferably because you want more room, and also you want to have columns for each speech. And I suggest using 2 colors, even though it's optional. It works. People use blue for F, so one side, and another color for another side, so like red for neg, but you could switch that up. So I talked about individual columns. So what it's usually going to look like is if you have a straight horizontal piece of paper. For example, in public forum debate, there are 8 speeches. So you want to divide. You could fold it up and then draw lines, or draw lines if you're good at drawing straight lines. So you divide it up into columns for each speech, and put the sides on the top of the paper. So it's going to alternate pro, con, pro, con. There you go. There you go. You have the columns. So if pro goes up and gives their affirmative speech, you're just going to write whatever the pro says in the column right here. And after that, when the negative side goes, pick up a different color if you have one. And don't directly write it under here, that's bad. So don't do that. You want to drop your pen all the way down to where there are no more pro on the left side, and start writing what the con says right there in their case. Now, you got their cases down, both sides, and you start from there. I talked about rows, so you make responses with arrows, arrows like that, arrows across the page. That's basically how you flow horizontally. Columns for each speech, and arrows to extend each speeches. Don't forget that when you write the second case, don't write it right next to each other, because you want to leave room for responses. Next one we're going to talk about is vertical flowing. And I used to flow horizontally, now I flow vertically. and I would recommend you guys to flow vertically because I switched over to vertical mainly because it gives more space for the initial arguments. If it's horizontal, um, when you start writing down the column, you figure out that there isn't more paper left to write down all the arguments. And I would prefer vertical, and I would recommend it because since most debate rounds kind of act as a funnel, so at the end of the debate, there's less arguments. You focus on the main points. This is the end, this is the beginning, and you don't really need all that much horizontal room. What you need is that vertical room so you could fit all the initial arguments and then kind of narrow down the debate as it goes on. So you don't really need like a long piece of paper to record the same amount of arguments that people have made in the beginning and keep it all the way to the end, because that really does not happen. And vertical flowing is used by most public forum debaters currently. And some rules: you need 2 pieces of paper. I don't care if it's a legal pad or just a white piece of paper. And you also want a 2 different colors because it really helps. 2 different colors of pen. And the way you set this up is similar to sticking the rule of columns and arrows and rows, but you have 2 different pieces of paper. And one stands for the pro, basically the pro case, and your con case. So if you're on the pro, you first write down whatever your case is. So you pre-flow. Pre-flowing is basically, you should pre-flow when you're flowing horizontally as well. Pre-flowing is basically a way of writing your own arguments down before a debate round because you already know them. And once the con presents their case, you write whatever that said. And all the rows, all the threads of arguments for the con side are going to stay on the con piece of paper, and vice versa for the pro. But when the con says something on the pro side, you want to do that in red color. So you write that, you write that, you write it. Response is made. Response is made. And when the pro makes the argument and response to arguments are on the con, you want a different color to kind of distinguish between which side said what. Whoops. So it will give you this will give you a pretty good idea of how it's supposed to happen. And I would say keep tight columns, because since it's vertical, you might run out of room at the end right here. So keep tight columns, write narrow. You don't have to draw narrow lines, but kind of predict or have a mental imaginary line going down there to keep yourself where you are. All right, that's it. That's all you need to know about flowing.